Hello, and welcome to the Handed Down podcast, celebrating traditional songs and the people who sing them. I'm Jenny Shaw, and today I'm joined by singer and fiddle player Chris Nelson. Chris, welcome to the show. Can I ask you just to introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you, Jenny. Yes, hello. I'm Chris Nelson. I live in Southport these days, although various parts of my life I've lived all over the country, including down in Hampshire, in Southampton. I played the fiddle since I was a child, but it's become less of a violin and more of a fiddle as the years have gone on. And singing is something I've come to in perhaps more recent years, and one of the things I've enjoyed an awful lot in recent times is trying to play the fiddle and sing at the same time, so-called fiddle singing. It's very different to what a lot of other people do, although it is becoming more popular.
That's great. We'll get into that a little bit later, I think, as well, and find out a bit more about that. But we're going to jump straight into your song. So we've just heard the tune on the fiddle. What's the song that you've brought, and what's it all about?
The song is called Death and the Lady, and it's a song I suppose I've been aware of for a very long time. You hear people sing it from time to time. It's one of those songs that's there in the tradition, and you hear lots of different versions of it. It comes from the Dance Macabre, or the Dance of Death, where the idea was of a conversation between death and the person who death has chosen to have dealings with. And I always imagine death speaking in capital letters like the character in Terry Pratchett. But this is an old song, certainly, and believed by Norma Waterson, who's talked about it and actually produced a rather wonderful version of the tune for it. She believes it comes from the time of the Black Death, which seems to make a lot of sense. It's a song essentially about a conversation between death and a young girl, and death is decided he's going to take her, and it being obviously from a time of where everybody had a very strong religious belief, she tries to suggest that he might like to give her a little bit longer on this earth so that she can mend her ways and perhaps end up in a better place, shall we say. So that's the essence of it. She tries to bribe death by offering him stuff that he doesn't want and doesn't need. And it just has the rather usual dark ending. For all the folk songs I love, they're dark. They're sad songs with sad subjects. But this one only has a death toll of 1, so I suppose it's not as bad as many of them.
That's a pretty good innings for a folk song, isn't it? Only one person died. I love the idea of it going back to the time of the Black Death. It makes absolute sense that death becomes a character, that, you know, a character in the narrative, a character in the song, and that idea about negotiating for your life.
Yeah,
which is really unusual, isn't it? I can only think of maybe one other song that's got that in it.
Yes, you don't see it very often, but there are an awful lot of versions of this song. But there's some interesting notes in the original version of the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs, which talks about the dance of death and dialogues between death and his victim being acted out in a morality play at one time. So I guess this is a kind of musical version of that.
Oh, so like a mummers play, something like that.
Something like that, yes.
That would make sense. Yeah, because it's a very visual song. I can always see it taking place in my head when I hear the song. So the idea of it being acted out makes perfect sense.
Absolutely, yeah. Fascinating subject, and one that feels really totally removed from our existence today, really. So an interesting look into the past, I think.
Yeah, although it's spookily relevant for the times we live in.
That's a good point, yes. Yeah.
Where's it come from in more recent times? I know that you've looked into this a little bit.
I'll tell you where my version came from. It was something that jumped out at me from an album called Layers of Ages by Peter Knight's Gig Spanner.
Yeah.
And Peter plays this extraordinary octave violin, which is a violin with strings that are an octave below the usual instrument, so it sounds a bit like a cello. And there's an incredible riff that the song starts with on that instrument. And then the tune starts, and I was just taken by the arrangement of that version of it, but also the tune itself. It sort of chose me, really. The song chose me as somebody who was going to sing it, because I love songs with interesting and strange melodies. Some of them are in interesting modes, and especially I like the interesting time signatures. And I noticed, actually, suddenly popped into my head a few months ago, that a lot of the traditional songs I really love are in 5/4 time, or something a bit like 5/4 time.
Yeah.
This one isn't quite in 5/4, it is some of the time. But songs like Adieu, Adieu, New York Trader, Ye Mariners All, Lord Marlborough, a lot of those were sung by Dave Swarbrick when he was with Fairport Convention, and I think he must have had the same liking for tunes of that kind. So interesting rhythm, and so the rhythm was interesting, and I thought the way the melody goes was interesting. Now, Peter Knight told me that he'd got it from Martin Carthy, but then he'd talked to Martin, and Martin had told him, no, it actually came from Norma Waterson. And lo and behold, I did a bit of rummaging on the web and found this video of Norma and Martin talking about it, and also Martin's sleeve notes from a Waterson Carthy album where the song appears. And Martin says, it's a dark song, and Norma did what was second nature to the Watersons in their heyday, transforming the tune by altering just a couple of notes. So I then did a bit more rummaging, and I discovered on the bookshelf a lovely book called 100 English Folk Songs for Medium Voice. I don't know if I've got a medium voice, and I don't know whether it's a medium voice for a man or a woman, actually. But this is a Cecil Sharp collection from around about the turn of the century. 1916 was the book. This song was collected by Cecil Sharp in Somerset. But when you look at the tune as written, with Cecil Sharp's lovely Edwardian piano accompaniment, it's in a major key. And what Norma Waterson seems to have done is to flatten the third and the seventh, but the third isn't flattened every time, which makes it all the more interesting. And so put it into a minor mode, which just for me really suits the sense of the song. Made it much more interesting than the original collected version.
It's got a very uneasy feel to it, hasn't it? And I think as you're talking, it makes me realise that it is that sort of flipping between major and minor. The way that the time of it, changes. It's in 5/4, but sometimes it isn't. It makes it very eerie and
That's right.
Otherworldly.
Yeah, Cecil Sharp's version is written. He doesn't put a time signature in at all. Yeah. But some of the bars are 5/4, some of them are 6/4. There's the occasional 3/4 bar. He just tries to write down what the singer sang, which is in pretty much free time. And I think my personal view is the way to interpret that is not to try to slavishly copy the way anybody else sings it, but to allow the words to set the pace. And that's, I think, what I've done, because when I go back now to listen to Norma's version and Peter Knight's version, I don't think I'm quite the same as either of them, which I think is okay.
You've just got to follow where the song wants to take you, don't you? Yeah. No, I've had similar experiences with songs, trying to work out quite what time it's in and where it's going. In the end, you just got to go with the inspiration, don't you?
I think that's right. I think certainly for me, if I was to try and analyse this, I'd end up sounding rather more wooden than I hope I do. The theory isn't necessary. I think just go with the words. And a lot of folk songs, one verse will be slightly different tune or slightly different rhythm to another in order to fit the words. Yeah. And again, I think that's okay.
When did you first discover this song? When were you first aware of it? You said you've been aware of different versions of it throughout the years.
Yes, but never really noticed it as it was just there. Being interested in traditional music, you hear people's versions of all sorts of songs, and I was aware, for example, that it was on a Shirley Collins album from many years ago,
Yeah.
but I hadn't really sort of tuned into it as something that really interested me that I wanted to do. So it was only when I heard Peter Knight's version, which was, I don't know, 10 years ago perhaps, not even that, that I thought, I'd really like to sing this tune, this song. I don't have any particular policy when it comes to choosing songs to sing. I just know them when I hear them. And I heard that and I thought, yeah, this is quite special, this tune.
Peter Knight was your gateway to the
Yeah.
song.
Yes, he was, yeah. And then I discovered Norma's version and the history of how she'd changed the tune, and it became all the more fascinating, really.
I came to this song quite late in life as well. I'm sure I must have heard the Shirley Collins version as a kid, but it was the Bellowhead version that I was first aware of, which was not all that long ago, and it's a bit of a different tune as well, isn't it?
It is,
So, yeah,
yes, it is, yeah.
it's a bit more jolly.
I found various, just looking at books on the shelf. As I say, there's one in the Penguin Book of English Folk Songs. That's the original 1959 version. And that's an interesting tune as well, but it's got repeated lines, which a lot of traditional songs have, so different. And then in Baring Gould's Songs of the West, which is a book that often amuses me really because of the things he writes in the notes.
Yeah.
A lot of the songs in there he's sanitised for an Edwardian genteel audience.
Oh dear.
But and I don't know if he has with this one. He doesn't say that he has, but before the usual first verse of the song, there's an extra verse which goes on about walking out on May mornings with lambs skipping and just nothing to do with the general dark nature of the song, really. So somebody's done some padding out, I think.
Yeah, a very inappropriate floating verse there.
Yeah. So a verse that could have been in 1,001 different English songs, but didn't need to be in this one, I would have said.
Well, maybe so as the ladies wouldn't faint at the thought of death.
Yeah.
Here's some lambs. What other versions are you aware of?
That's about it, really. I haven't been out looking for them. As I say, that's the tune that I like.
Yeah.
There are other tunes. It's a great song. And yes, I was aware of the Bellowhead version. In fact, I've almost certainly got it somewhere. But and I know that John Bowden included it in his Folk Song a Day project a little while ago as well.
Yes, yeah, he did.
So yes, I've heard different versions of them, and I just keep marvelling at how many there are, really.
A song that came to mind as we've been talking is "Oh Death." So the American song, and it's quite different because it's someone addressing death directly in the song. But I feel like I need to go away now and see if it's connected, see if it's part of the same family. It seems like it might be.
That's really fascinating. Yes, it was Ralph Stanley that sang it on "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," didn't he? It was a fabulous version. Yeah. That's a very good observation, Jenny. I share your interest in that. Yeah, we'll have to see.
Oh, we'll have to go away and find out.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about the song before we move on to other things?
Really interesting lyrics from a very interesting time, and so there's a history lesson there, and I do enjoy songs that tell me something about history.
Yeah.
And again, as I've said, a fascinating tune. Put the two together, and it's a song that I want to be involved with.
Absolutely.
Which is what I've done. And I've just sung it unaccompanied because I think it's a tune that is robust enough and is probably best sung unaccompanied, although there are some great versions of it, such as Peter Knight's, which I didn't want to try to copy. But yeah, it's you can mess around with the tempo if you sing it on its own, and I think it stands up very well as a perfect song for singing a cappella. You
really get that sense, don't you, of that intimate dialogue with death. It's quite stark. It feels like you are there with death.
Yeah. Oh yes. And
I've
in singing it, I've actually tried to give death and the lady slightly different voices. Mm-hmm. And I must give credit actually to Rose Ellen Kemp at Stones Barn, because I had a little singing lesson with her when we used this song as a basis for some vocal technique work, and it was actually her idea to do that, so thank you, Rose.
And do you sing death in capital letters?
It's in my, yeah. It's how I think of it. I suppose. Death's obviously got a very distinctive voice, hasn't he, in Terry Pratchett?
He definitely does.
He's a great character. I mean, his Death, is the usual Death with the scythe and the black hood, but he's also got a teenage daughter that he's concerned about and wants to retire and spend more time with his family. I just think he's a wonderful character.
He's brilliant. I think he's maybe not quite spooky enough for this song, though.
No.
I think we need a much more menacing Death for this.
Yes, indeed, and I have, as I say, I've just tried to make it sound a bit different to when the girl is talking and when Death is talking, just so hopefully you can distinguish between them.
So let's talk about you as a musician. Where did it all start for you, and what brought you to traditional music?
Well, my family background was very much classical music. My father was a music teacher. Both my parents were competent pianists. But pop music, or popular music at all, really wasn't part of our family culture. But I had violin lessons. I always wanted to play the instrument. From the age of about 11, I suppose, I was having lessons and enjoyed it up to a point, but I didn't put the work in and clearly wasn't going to be a great classical musician. In fact, I remember being encouraged to join the local amateur orchestra and sitting at the very back of the second violin sections and miming, trying to play every fourth or fifth note. And I thought, no, this isn't for me really, because you've got to work really hard to be good at this, and I wasn't prepared to. So folk music was a kind of escape from that world while still being able to use the techniques I'd learned to actually handle the instrument. And I'd started listening to, this was in the mid-70s when I was a teenager, and I started listening to the folk rock bands of the day, and then started to think about some of the songs I'd heard probably going back to primary school and earlier. In fact, I think nursery rhymes probably were the beginning of my love for traditional song, curiously enough, because a lot of them are related and a lot of them are quite dark. Yeah. So it probably goes back to that. So there's a little seed sowed in my brain somewhere from being sung nursery rhymes by my parents, and of course listened with mother on the home service when I was a very small child.
Ooh,
and
I like that too.
A gentleman called George Dixon who used to sing in a very plummy, trained voice all these nursery rhymes. Got into my teens, started to hear some folk music, although it wasn't in our family culture at all, and just suddenly realised that, not suddenly, over a period of time realised that these songs did speak to me, especially the English ones, curiously. And I think I tend to home in on English songs because I think it's probably it's not in my DNA, but it's probably in my very early conditioning from listening to things like nursery rhymes and children's songs. Yeah. And there's something about a lot of traditional songs that are very closely related in the way they run to a lot of children's songs, I think.
I grew up with Listen with Mother as well, and listening to all those nursery rhymes, and you're right, they're similar in the musical structure, but also some of the themes. Some nursery rhymes, as you say, are very dark, and I can almost, a bit of a stretch, but I can almost imagine something like Death and the Lady popping up in a nursery rhyme, maybe in a slightly different form, but nursery rhymes are not afraid to go there, are they?
No, well, I think Ring a Ring of Roses is meant to be about the Black Death, isn't it?
Yes.
Tissue, we all fall down. I believe that's the plague or the Black Death.
Yeah.
or some such. So yeah, that's right. Sanitised for children, but there's a lot of interesting meaning there. Yeah.
And actually, children quite like dark stuff anyway, I think. Left to their own devices, it's not particularly sanitised, so I think it all works quite well. And I was just thinking, actually, that I came to this song late, but teenage me would have loved that song. So what a shame I missed out there. Probably just as well. So where did you take the folk music then? You do a lot of performing, I know that.
Yeah, well, I suppose it really took off when I went to university. So there I was, a recently failed grade 6 violin, having decided if I was going to carry on playing the fiddle, I needed to take it in a new direction. So I got to university and joined the university Morris team as a fiddle player, and that was the beginning of learning some new tunes. The people who were playing for the Morris team formed the Ceilidh band, which lasted for 8 years, actually, well beyond university. And we ended up as a sort of electric folk rock band. Then we recruited a singer in 1983, and that singer was Siobhan, who's now my wife. Yeah. And so Siobhan and I, years later, started to sing as a duo. We've been in various bands as well over the years, but we started to do things as a duo, which was quite interesting because I'm not a guitarist or a keyboard player. Siobhan doesn't play an instrument, so it was a case of finding out what we could do with what we had. And so starting to use the fiddle and various other stringed instruments that are tuned the same as a fiddle. Yeah. Like mandola, tenor guitar, but all tuned the same because I can think in strings that are tuned in fifths rather than fourths. Yeah. And then later on, when a lot more people started to do the fiddle singing thing, in fact, we're really talking very recent years, I started to work up some songs where I played the fiddle and sang at the same time, and that's been quite an interesting little journey, very recent years. And I'm still very much a work in progress, I think. So in the early years of our duo, Siobhan was very much the singer. I would have I was entitled to probably one song per half of a set. But over the years it's grown, and I'm doing more and more of the singing, and very much enjoying it. And didn't think of myself as a singer for a long time. I was a fiddle player who sang. Yeah. But I'm enjoying being a singer. And having some help from, as I mentioned, Rose at Stones Barn and Maddie Pryor, we've gone to a lot of the vocal technique courses there, and discovered all sorts of things I didn't know I had. So more and more singing as time's gone on, and the fiddle playing has moved from being playing of tunes for dancing to using the fiddle as the main accompaniment for song.
And when we first met 2 years ago, and that was at Stones Barn,
yes,
you and Siobhan were rehearsing for do I call it a folk musical? It was definitely play with songs in it. So I remember you singing some of the songs from that. Tell us about that, because you've recently staged that, haven't you?
We have, at long last, yes. Yeah. It's been a long time in the making because obviously of the COVID hiatus. I think we just call it a show. Yeah. It's a story with songs and narration and a slideshow, so it's really everything except acting. Yeah. It's called Avondale. The history of the group that's performing it, we call ourselves the Cork Jacket Crew, and that's because several years ago we did a show called Cork Jackets and Drill, which told the story of the Southport and Lytham St Anne's lifeboat disaster of 1886. To this day, the worst loss of life of lifeboat crews ever in one incident. And that was written by Len Pentin, who is a local playwright and songwriter in Southport, where we live. And that really caught the imagination of audiences locally, because it is a story that a lot of local people knew. Yeah. Very successful. We did about 33 shows altogether, and we might yet bring it back one day. But having done that show, then Len turned his attention to a story that he'd just picked up, a little snippet of a story, a local history story, about a woman called Kate Fitzpatrick, who was originally British but had lived in America, ended up in an insane asylum in New York. And this is in about 1914. And at the beginning of the First World War, it appears that they decided to repatriate her, so she was put on a ship and sent back to England, where she ended up in the Ormskirk Workhouse. She was very mentally unwell and wasn't able to articulate who she was or where she was going or where she was from, but she had this word Avondale on her lips. Nobody quite knew what or where Avondale was, and it may have been Ainsdale, which is part of Southport. Yeah. So it's the story of Kate, a tragic story, and it's also the story of a woman who lived in Chicago, a woman called Sarah Lund, who was searching for a missing relative thought lost at sea. Don't want to do any spoilers because I'm hoping that people will at some stage come and see the show. But it's the story of these two women who you wouldn't have expected to have ever met or had any contact with one another, told in a series of songs with little bits of narration to link them together. When we first met you, Jenny, which as you say was about 2 years ago, we were probably just about to start performing this. And as we'd done with Cork Jackets and Drill, we thought we'll run it in a few little village halls and do some gigs, small gigs for groups like local history associations and that sort of thing who are interested in the story, and get it really perfected and honed to a perfect level of performance, and then we'll start to look for bigger venues.
Yeah. And
with this in mind, we got ourselves a gig at the Atkinson Theatre in Southport. Unfortunately, because of COVID, everything got postponed and cancelled, and then the Atkinson gig got postponed but eventually rescheduled for September this year. And we ended up with it being our first show, rather than the show that we would have done after lots and lots of trial runs in smaller venues. But it went really well, and we're very pleased to have done it. So it was a good launch for the show. Still, at the moment, we feel that the sort of people who want to come to our shows are probably of the older generation and not quite ready in large numbers to come out to see things. So we're expecting that we'll be putting more performances on next year from spring of 2020 onwards. So that's a work in progress really at the moment to schedule some more shows. So we've got one show under our belt. We've recorded a soundtrack CD with all the songs, which is available, and we're waiting to see what 2022 brings us in terms of performance possibilities for that.
Can you not just share with us all the things in your head, the whys and the wherefores, put this mystery to bed? Tell me your name now, and tell me your secrets. Tell me of the road that led to this door. Tell me the names of the people in your story. Tell me of the faces you have seen.
So how can people get hold of the CD if they would like to?
There's a website for the show which is avondale.uk.com, and if you go to that website or to Siobhan and my website, which is chrisandsiobhan.co.uk, on both websites there's a place where you can buy CDs, and this CD is available there. And yes, we're very absolutely delighted if people wanted to buy the CD as a taster for the show to come.
Excellent, and we'll put all those links in the show notes so people can find them. And if people want to hear you and Siobhan play, where should they go?
Under normal circumstances, our regular place is the Bothy Folk Club in Southport. The Bothy Folk Club has, until COVID, been meeting on a Sunday night at the Park Golf Club in Southport. Unfortunately, at the moment, the golf club isn't available to us, but we're hoping to get back either there or to a new venue in the new year. At the moment, the club is ticking along in a pub in town in Southport called the Guest House. Lovely pub. It's not really quite the large room that we need to run the club, so it's running on a sort of informal basis at the moment. But it's nice to see people coming back and meeting some friends that we haven't seen for a year, 18 months. So it's great that the club's got started again. So under normal circumstances, Siobhan and I are residents at the Bothy Folk Club. So that's the place to see us on a regular basis. And we do occasional gigs as a duo. We do occasional gigs as a trio as well, with Len Pentin, who wrote the show Avondale. And Len's got other songs, of course, that he's written, and Siobhan and I and Len have been rehearsing up some of those. But this is all a bit on hold at the moment.
Will she know the freedom of pennies in her purse and bread on a table freshly made? Will she see a sunset through windows of her own, drinking tea at a table she has laid? And will she rise in the morning at the hour of her choice? Will she take a walk down streets and roads afar? And will she sleep the afternoon, free from any chores, and drink a glass of cheer when the sun goes down? Oh no, 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 another day comes, another day.
You did an online gig, didn't you, recently?
Oh, that was fun. Yes, we did. Well, we had a booking at the Bromley Cross Folk Club, or Folk at the Barlow, I think they call themselves now, which is at Edgeworth in Lancashire. And this was a booking that we'd had from probably a year ago. They offered us the opportunity to do it on Zoom rather than in person, which was a very interesting experience, actually. And it worked better than I could have expected, I think, and so I'm told. Siobhan really enjoyed it. I'd have to say I prefer to have real people in 3 dimensions in front of me, but rather than just on a screen. But yeah, it was a means to an end to keep going during the pandemic, and it's quite interesting that people are now doing tours but putting in the occasional online show as well. So I think it might be here to stay alongside live performance.
Yeah, there is something quite appealing, I think, as an audience member about, sometimes you do want to go out and go to a live show. Sometimes you want to sit on your sofa and have it come to you. And that, maybe that's just me, but I think that's quite appealing. And, we're all learning these new skills as well, aren't we? So
yes, we're
all quite flexible now. But
I do agree, Jenny. I mean, certainly on a cold night, sometimes you just don't want to turn out, do you?
No.
I think what concerns me slightly, I suppose, is that if people are travelling, performing in different parts of the country in various theatres and venues, but they're also offering the thing online, that it just bothers me slightly that live shows might start to have smaller and smaller audiences as people choose the online version. And then, of course, that affects people's livelihoods. So I'm slightly concerned about that. On the other hand, if somebody isn't actually touring that year, it might be nice to have the occasional live show. And those of us who don't depend on it for a living, it's an option, isn't it? It's an option.
It is, but I do feel for people who do depend on it for a living. I think
absolutely.
There's such a lot of downward pressures on artists at the moment. It's not a great time.
No, it's very hard. It's very hard, and I would say to people, just if you can, try and get out there and support people's live shows, because they've had 18 months of no income.
Chris, thank you very much. We're back next month with another interview and a Christmas Eve special. So do subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple or Google, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. And you can also find us on buzzsprout.com/handeddown. And we're also on Twitter, if you're a Twitter user, as Handed Down Pod. So do follow us there too. I'll see you next time. But in the meantime, here is Chris Nelson with Death and the Lady.
As I walked out one day, I saw an old man all on the way. His head was bald, his beard was grey, his clothing made of the cold earth and clay. His clothing made of the cold earth and clay. I said, old man, what man are you? What country do you belong to? My name is Death. Have you heard of me? All kings and princes bow down unto me. And you, fair maid, must come along with me. Oh, I'll give you gold, and I'll give you pearl, and I'll give you costly rich robes to wear, if you will grant me just a little while, and give me time my life to amend. And give me time my life to amend. Oh, I want no gold, and I want no pearl, and I want no costly rich robes to wear, and I cannot grant you just a little while, or give you time your life to amend. Or give you time your life to amend. In 6 months' time this young girl died. Let this be on my tombstone, she cried. Here lies a poor, distracted maid, who in her youth she was taken away. Her clothing made of the cold earth and clay.